The cursor blinked on the final slide. Blink, blink, blink. A tiny rhythmic heartbeat for a project that had consumed mine for the last 6 months. Project Chimera. It was my baby, my magnum opus, my beautifully intricate tapestry, woven from millions of lines of raw, chaotic data. I had spent countless nights and weekends coaxing it into existence. Findinge, Petrons, the stories, hey elegant, undeniable truths, hidden within the noise. This project wasn't just about data. It was about transforming our entire approach to market strategy. It was smart, eat Westlake, and it was, without a shred of arrogance, the best work I had ever done. It was my promotion to lead analyst, sitting there on the company's server, glowing in the late-night quiet of the office. My fingers hovered over the keyboard, a final obsessive itch to check the numbers one last time. I resisted. At 32, I had learned that my brand of meticulousness could easily tip into a self-defeating perfectionism. It was done. It was perfect. I leaned back in my ergonomic chair, the familiar squeak a sound of weary triumph, and took a long sip of my lukewarm coffee. The office was a ghost town. Only the low hum of the servers and the distant rattle of the cleaning crew's cart broke the silence. This was my element. I was Liam Carter, a man who preferred the company of spreadsheets to people, a man who believed in the quiet, unassailable power of a job well done. I let my work do the talking, a philosophy that had served me well, if slowly. Tomorrow morning at 10, Ewald Welk, te letters heap team, including our CEO, Amelia Vance, through Chimera. My boss, Catherine Reed, had already seen the preliminary findings. She'd been impressed, her usual stoicism breaking into a rare, genuine smile. "This is it, Liam," she'd said. "This is the one." We both knew what the one meant. Of course, there was Mark Brewer, my colleague, my rival, my perpetual, grinning thorn in the side. Where I was quiet, Mark was loud. Where I was methodical, Mark was flashy. He produced half the substance in twice the time, but he presented it with the flair of a seasoned magician, dazzling the executives with buzzwords and charisma, while I quietly built the engines he only pretended to understand. He wanted the lead analyst position as badly as I did, but he wanted it without the work. He saw it as his right, a prize for his superior social maneuvering. I saw him now, walking toward my cubicle, his tie already loosened, a jacket slung casually over his shoulder. He had a habit of making late-night appearances when he knew I was grinding, a predatory check-in disguised as camaraderie. "Burning the midnight oil, Carter." Hay sighed, his voice a little too loud in the empty space. He leaned against my cubicle wall, peering at my screen, putting the final touches on the masterpiece. Something like that, a mumblet, instinctively minimizing the presentation window. "Don't be shy," he chuckled, a low, grating sound. "I'm sure it's brilliant. Probably put my little quarterly review to shame." He winked. "Just remember to back it up. These servers can be finicky. Would be a tragedy if something happened to all that hard work right before the big show." He clapped me on the shoulder, a gesture that was meant to seem friendly but felt more like a claim of ownership. Then he was gone, his whistling echoing down the hall. I watched him go, an uneasy feeling coiling in my gut. The comment about the servers was classic Mark, a little dig, a veiled threat wrapped in a just kidding smile. I shook my head, dismissing it as paranoia. I clicked save one last time, watched the progress bar complete, and logged off. The path was clear. Tomorrow, the work would speak for itself, and it would be undeniable. I slept the dreamless sleep of the utterly exhausted, a depth-heavy slumber earned by months of relentless effort. My alarm felt like an act of violence. I went through my morning routine in a haze of nervous anticipation, my thoughts entirely consumed by the presentation. I visualized my opening, the key data points, the confident way I would answer their questions. I wore my best suit, the one that made me feel less like an analyst and more like the leader I was about to become. I got to the office an hour early. The floor was still quiet, a gentle pre-work hum in the air. I wanted to do one final top-to-bottom run-through, to load the presentation into my muscle memory until I could do it in my sleep. I set my coffee on the desk, took a deep breath, and logged into my machine. My fingers flew across the keyboard, navigating the familiar server paths. Innovate_main greater than departments greater than analytics greater than projects greater than Potter_Liam greater than project_Chimera. I double-clicked the folder. This folder is empty. I stared at the words. They didn't compute. My brain felt like it had short-circuited. This folder is empty. It was impossible. My heart started to beat a frantic, panicked rhythm against my ribs. I clicked again and again. Empty, empty, empty. Okay, don't panic. It's a glitch, a network error. I refreshed the directory. Still empty. I logged out and logged back in. Still empty. The presentation. Hey Detti. The appendices. The executive summary. 6 months of my life. Gone. A cold sweat broke out on my forehead. This wasn't a glitch. This was wrong. My mind immediately flashed to Mark's words from the night before. Would be a tragedy if something happened. No, he wouldn't. Even for Mark, this was a line you didn't cross. This wasn't just corporate rivalry. This was sabotage. This was theft. My hands were trembling, but my mind, honed by years of finding needles in digital haystacks, kicked into gear. Panic wouldn't help me. Data would. I opened the server's back-end portal, my fingers flying, pulling up the access logs from my directory. My permissions were limited, but I could see basic activity. My eyes scanned the timestamps, my blood running cold. Last modified, 2:17 a.m. I hadn't been in the office at 2:17 a.m. I had left before midnight. I dug deeper, my stomach churning with a mixture of dread and furious adrenaline. I cross-referenced the network login records. There it was. A remote access request to my folder, / followed by a delete command. The login ID was masked, of course, but the workstation source was not. IDM_Brewer. It was him. He had done it. He had stayed late or logged in from home, waited until he was sure I was gone, and then he had simply erased me. The sheer, breathtaking audacity of it left me speechless. He hadn't just sabotaged my project, he had salted the earth where it grew. He knew that with only hours until the presentation, I had no time to recover, no time to rebuild. He thought he had left me with nothing. He thought he had won. And in that moment, sitting in the ruins of my career, a stringy cold calm washed over me. He was wrong. The panic receded, replaced by something else, something cold and sharp and crystalline. It was a feeling I hadn't felt before, a kind of glacial fury. My first instinct, the Liam Carter instinct, was to run to Catherine, run to HR, lay the logs at their feet and expose Mark for the snake he was. I played the scenario out in my head. I'd present my evidence, a string of code on a log screen. Catherine would be sympathetic, furious on my behalf. She'd call Mark in, and Mark, slick, charismatic Mark, would deny everything. He'd feign shock and outrage. He'd suggest I was trying to cover for my own incompetence, that I hadn't finished the project and was looking for a scapegoat. He'd say the logs were circumstantial. He'd suggest I was framing him. It would become a messy, protracted, he said battle. The presentation would be postponed. An investigation would be launched. And, in the end, with no definitive proof, it would be a stain on both our records. He would muddy the waters until the truth was just a matter of opinion. And he would probably get away with it. He always did. I stared at the empty folder, at the digital ghost of my hard work. No, not this time. A direct confrontation was what he expected. It was a fight on his terms, using his weapons of charisma and plausible deniability. To beat him, I needed to fight on my terms, with data, with logic, with a trap so perfectly constructed that his own arrogance would be the thing that sprung it. And then the idea, fully formed and utterly terrifying, bloomed in my mind. Mark hadn't just deleted my files. I knew him. His ego wouldn't allow him to simply destroy my work. He would want to use it. He would steal it, rebrand it as his own, and present it himself. He would march into that boardroom, stand at the podium, and pass off my magnum opus as his own spontaneous brilliance. He was counting on me to be a victim. He was counting on me to panic, to run to the authorities, to make a scene. He was not counting on me to do nothing. What if I let him? What if I let him walk right into the fire, holding the gasoline can himself? My heart began to hammer again, this time not with panic, but with thrilling audacity. It was a gamble of epic proportions. It meant sacrificing my own chance to present, to get the credit. It meant sitting there in silence while he paraded my work around. It meant trusting in a secret weapon I had built into the project months ago. A digital failsafe I had almost forgotten about. Months earlier, while building the master PowerPoint template for the Chimera project, I'd been playing around with advanced macro functions, On a whim, born of a deep-seated subconscious distrust of Mark, I had embedded a little Trojan horse into the very fabric of the presentation file. It was an invisible, complex script, tied to the master slide. It looked like a standard corporate branding element, / a bit of harmless code to ensure our company logo, the stylized Innovate Solutions emblem, rendered correctly on any screen, but it had a hidden trigger. The script was programmed to scan the presentation's spoken environment for a specific, unusual keyword, a word I would have to introduce into the conversation. Once triggered, / the macro would execute a simple, devastating command. It would search every slide in the presentation for the Innovate Solutions logo and replace it instantly with the new image file I had embedded and hidden within the template itself. An image file that contained just 5 words, property of Liam Carter. It was insane. It was theatrical. It was something a character in a movie would do, not a non-confrontational data analyst. But the more I thought about it, the more perfect it seemed. It wasn't a he said situation. It was irrefutable, public, and utterly humiliating proof. It would let Mark convict himself. All I had to do was set the stage and have the courage to see it through. I took a deep, shaky breath. The old Liam was screaming at me to reconsider, to take the safe route. But the old Liam had been letting Mark walk all over him for years. The old Liam was tired. Today, a new Liam was making the decisions. I closed the server logs. I leaned back in my chair and deliberately composed my face into a mask of pure, unadulterated panic. Then I picked up my phone, my finger hovering over Catherine's name. It was time to give the performance of my life. It was time to report that my project, my beautiful, perfect project, Chimera, had vanished into thin air. The call to Catherine was one of the hardest things I've ever had to do. My voice, which I had intended to fill with practiced panic, came out genuinely shaky. The lie was so enormous it felt like it was physically choking me. Catherine, I stared, my voice a little too high. Something's wrong. The Chimera folder, it's empty. Everything is gone. There was a stunned silence on the other end of the line. What do you mean, gone? She finally asked, her voice sharp with disbelief. I mean it's gone, I repeated, letting a note of hysteria creep in. I logged in this morning to do a final run-through, and the folder is empty. The presentation, hey Detty Fales, everything. I don't know what happened. A server crash, maybe, a hardware failure. I don't know. I could almost hear her mind racing, processing the catastrophic implications. The biggest presentation of the quarter, unused a fell horse, and the project had vanished. Okay, Liam, stay calm. SHE sighed, though her own voice was tight with stress. I'm coming in. Don't touch anything. We'll call IT. We'll figure this out. I hung up, my hands slick with sweat. Phase 1 was complete. I was now officially the victim. The poor, unfortunate soul whose magnum opus had been swallowed by the digital ether. The feeling of duplicity was nauseating, but the thought of Mark's smug face was the antidote. Catherine arrived 20 minutes later, looking stressed and concerned. She and I spent the next hour in a frantic, performative dance of disaster recovery. We called the IT department, who, after a remote diagnostic, confirmed that a massive folder had indeed been deleted and that, due to a recent, ill-timed server migration, the instant backups were corrupted. It was a plausible, if unlikely, scenario, a perfect storm of technological misfortune. My lie was holding. I can't believe this, Catherine said, pacing in front of my desk and rubbing her temples. Liam, I am so sorry. This is a nightmare. I should have kept the local copy. I sighed, burying my face in my hands. I feel so stupid. It was the perfect, self-flagellating touch. Just then, Mark walked in, coffee in hand, a look of deep, manufactured concern on his face. He had timed his entrance perfectly. Catherine, Liam, he sighed, his voice oozing sympathy. I heard what happened. My God, that's horrible. Liam, buddy, I'm so sorry. All that work. Is there anything I can do? I had to clench my jaw to keep from screaming. The sheer unmitigated gall of the man was breathtaking. He was an artist of deceit. I don't think so, Mark, Catherine said, her voice weary. It's gone, all of it. Mark shook his head slowly, a mask of profound sadness, and then he played his trump card, while he began, with a hesitant, almost humble tone. I know it's not on the same level as Chimera, but I did just finish that quarterly analysis. It has some interesting top-level insights. If we need something, anything, to present to the leadership team, I could probably polish it up in time for the 10 o'clock meeting. It was a masterful move. He wasn't just the sympathetic colleague, he was the savior. The humble servant willing to step up in a crisis. He was offering them a lifeboat, knowing full well he was the one who had sunk the ship. Catherine looked from Mark's earnest, helpful face to my devastated one. She was in an impossible position. Canceling the meeting was not an option. Showing up with nothing was even worse. It's not as comprehensive as Liam's work, Mark added quickly, a perfect imitation of humility. But it might prevent us from looking completely unprepared. Catherine sighed, a sound of pure defeat. You're right, Mark, she said. It's our only option. Can you be ready? Mark gave a solemn, determined nod. I won't let you down, Catherine. He glanced at me, a flicker of triumphant pity in his eyes. Don't worry, Liam Hay sighed, lowering his voice. I'll make sure our department still looks good. I just nodded, unable to speak, my mind a raging inferno of hatred and adrenaline. He turned and walked back to his desk, the hero of the hour. I watched him go, and I knew, with absolute certainty, that I had made the right decision. He was walking into my trap, and I was going to let him. The next 2 hours were the longest of my life. I sat at my desk, staring blankly at my monitor, the very picture of a man defeated. Colleagues would stop by, having heard the news through the office grapevine, offering condolences as if a family member had died. That's brutal, men. So sorry to hear that, Liam. Let me know if you need anything. Each word of sympathy was a fresh jab of guilt, a reminder of the massive deception I was perpetuating. I nodded, mumbled my thanks, and tried to look as shattered as possible. It wasn't difficult. Part of me was shattered. My trust in my workplace, in the fundamental idea that good work would be rewarded, had been demolished. Across the aisle, I could see Mark. He was a whirlwind of focused energy, but I knew what he was really doing. He wasn't polishing up his own project. He was familiarizing himself with mine. I could see the faint glow of my presentation template on his screen, the distinctive dark blue background and gold trim I had designed. He was likely doing a fine place on the file, swapping my name for his in the footers, perhaps tweaking a few sentences to make it sound more like him. He was an actor learning his lines, preparing to take the stage and perform a role he hadn't written. Every so often, he would look over at me, a quick, furtive glance. It was a look of profound, smug satisfaction. He saw a man broken by a random act of misfortune. He had no idea he was looking at his executioner. My own preparation was internal, silent, the key word, the trigger for my digital bomb. I had to choose the right one. It had to be a word that was unusual enough not to be said by accident, but natural enough that I could weave it into a question without sounding like a lunatic. It couldn't be a simple word like data or market. It had to be something specific, something with a double meaning. I settled on the word integrity, foundational integrity. It sounded like corporate jargon, something an analyst would say, but it was also a direct challenge, a question about the very soul of the work. And just in case he repeated the phrase back to me without triggering the macro, I built in a secondary voice-activated trigger, a word only I would say, a word that would be my signature on the whole affair. Authentically. The plan was simple. Let him finish his entire presentation. Let him soak in the praise. Let the leadership team be completely convinced of his brilliance. Then, during the Q&A, I would stand up, I would ask my question, and I would pull the pin. At 9:45, Catherine came to my desk. Her face was grim. Liam, she said softly, you don't have to come to the meeting. I can tell them you were too upset. It was a kind offer, an exit ramp. The old Liam would have taken it in a heartbeat. But the man I was now, he's Nell, cold, calculating version of myself, shook his head. No, I said, my voice raspy. I should be there to offer support. Catherine looked at me, her expression a mixture of pity and admiration. She thought I was being a team player, even in the face of my own personal disaster. You're a good man, Liam, she said. The words twisted in my stomach. No, I'm not, I thought. Good men don't set traps like this. But then I looked over at Mark, who was now standing up, stretching, a confident smile on his face as he prepared to go to the boardroom. And I thought, no, this isn't about being good. This is about being just. As we all started to walk toward the conference room, Mark fell into step beside me. He sighed, his voice low and confidential. You holding up okay? I just nodded, not trusting myself to speak. Listen, he continued, I'm going to knock this out of the park for us, for the team, and when the lead analyst spot opens up, I'll remember who was in my corner. He was offering me scraps from my own table. He was promising to reward my silence and victimhood with a pat on the head. The arrogance was staggering. It was the final drop of fuel on the fire of my resolve. I looked at him, right in his confident, lying eyes. Good luck, Mark, I said. Break a leg. The boardroom at Innovate Solutions was on the top floor, a glass-walled cage in the sky that overlooked the entire city. It was designed to intimidate. A long, polished mahogany table reflected the recessed lighting above, making it seem like you were floating in a void of corporate power. At the head of the table sat Amelia Vance, our CEO. She was a woman in her 50s with sharp eyes and a reputation for not suffering fools. Flanking her were the other C-suite executives, the gods of our particular Olympus. I took a seat at the far end of the table, next to Catherine. I felt like a ghost at a feast. My usual role was at the podium, commanding the data, but today I was just a spectator, a footnote to a disaster. Mark, on the other hand, looked like he was born for this room. He strode to the head of the table, shook hands with the executives, his smile easy and confident. He radiated an aura of competence and control. He was a natural. Amelia Bacon, his voice smooth as silk. Thank you for your time. I know you were all expecting to see Liam's Project Chimera today, and it's a terrible shame what happened to his files. But in the spirit of resilience, I'd like to walk you through some top-level analysis that I believe still offers some significant strategic insights. He was brilliant. He acknowledged my absence, painted himself as the humble understudy, and set the stage perfectly. He plugged his laptop into the massive screen at the front of the room, and then I saw it, my work, my creation, my soul, displayed for all to see. The title slide came up, Quarterly Strategic Analysis, A New Paradigm. Underneath, in bold letters, Mark Brewer. A hot, possessive rage washed over me. Every slide, every chart, every bullet point was mine. The color scheme I had spent days perfecting, the custom graphs I had coded myself, the precise, powerful language I had slaved over. It was like watching someone walk around wearing my skin. Catherine leaned over to me, whispering, His quarterly analysis looks remarkably similar to your Chimera template. I guess he was inspired, I whispered back, my voice tight. She gave me a sharp look, a flicker of suspicion in her eyes, but she said nothing more. Mark launched into the presentation, and I had to admit, he was good. He had clearly studied the material. He moved through the slides with a practiced ease, hitting the main points, his voice confident and persuasive. He was a gifted performer. I had always known that, but he was performing my music. He was like a pianist playing a complex concerto by ear, hitting all the notes but missing the soul. He presented my conclusions without understanding the deep, nuanced journey I had taken through the data to arrive at them. He would say things like, and as you can see, the data here clearly indicates a market shift. He didn't understand the why. He didn't know about the 5 outlier datasets I had to reconcile to make that chart, or the subtle correlation I had found that gave the conclusion its real power. He was reading the cover of the book, not telling the story. To the executives, however, it was a bravura performance. They nodded along, impressed. I could see Amelia Vance looking at Mark with a new level of respect. He was confident, he was charismatic, and he had stepped up in a crisis. In the world of the C-suite, those were qualities that often mattered more than the quiet, heads-down work of an analyst like me. I sat there, my hands clenched into fists under the table, my heart a cold, heavy stone in my chest. This was the hardest part. Watching him get the credit, watching him receive the accolades that were rightfully mine. Every fiber of my being wanted to scream, "That's a lie. That's all mine." But I held my tongue. I waited. My trap was set. The bait was taken. All I had to do was wait for the right moment to let it snap shut. And that moment was getting closer with every slide he presented. And so, Mark concluded, moving to his final slide, my final slide, with a flourish. By reallocating our resources toward these emerging micromarkets, The data suggests we can anticipate a potential 15% growth in user acquisition over the next 2 quarters. He smiled, a witty, triumphant grin that radiated self-satisfaction. Thank you. A ripple of impressed murmurs went around the table. Amelia Vance nodded slowly, a genuine smile on her face. Mark, I have to say, this is impressive work, especially on such short notice. Thank you, Amelia, he said, practically preening. I was happy to be able to step in. I have a few questions, said the CFO, and for the next 5 minutes, Mark fielded them with ease. They were mostly softball questions, high-level inquiries about budget allocation and potential ROI. He handled them well. Using the buzzwords and corporate speak he was so fluent in, he was on his home turf. He was untouchable. He was radiating an aura of victory. It was everything I had hoped for. The Q&A started to wind down. This was it. My window of opportunity was about to close. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my ears. My palms were slick. This was the moment of truth. If I didn't speak now, I would be condemning myself to silence forever, the man who let his life's work be stolen without a fight. Amelia looked around the table. Any final questions? Before Catherine could even formulate a no, I cleared my throat. Every head in the room turned to me. The ghost at the feast was about to speak. I saw a flicker of annoyance in Mark's eyes, quickly masked by a look of polite curiosity. He probably thought I was going to offer him a compliment to complete my role as the gracious loser. I stood up slowly, my legs feeling unsteady. I have a question, aside, my voice surprisingly steady. For Mark. Amelia nodded, her expression unreadable. Go ahead, Liam. I looked directly at Mark, across the long, polished expanse of the table. Mark A. Bagan. My tone calm and academic. The projections on slide 14, the ones concerning the emerging micromarkets, they're aggressive. They rely on a number of cascading assumptions about user behavior. I paused, letting the technical nature of the question hang in the air. My question is about the underlying data. Can you speak to its foundational integrity? There it was, the first key. I had planted the charge. Mark blinked, thrown for a second by the technical depth of the question. This wasn't a softball. I was asking him to go off script, to demonstrate a real understanding of the data's guts. The foundational integrity, he repeated. Stellineg, a tiny bead of sweat appeared on his temple. Well, Liam, as you know, the data is sourced from our primary user database. It's solid. He tried to pivot back to his comfort zone. The key isn't the raw data itself, but the way we interpret it, the narrative we build around it. I understand that, oppressed, relentless, but I'm asking about the foundation. The raw data. You're confident in it. You've personally vetted it. You're certain that the work is completely solid from the ground up. He was getting flustered. The executives were watching him, their expressions shifting from impressed to curious. This was a real challenge, analyst to analyst. Yes, of course, his sighed, his voice a little too sharp. The integrity is foundational. I stand by the analysis. It's my work. He had said the words, but the trigger was more complex. It needed one more thing, a final confirmation from me. It was time to pull the pin. I held his gaze. I'm glad to hear you stand by it, Mark, aside, my voice dropping slightly, drawing every ounce of attention in the room. Because true analysis, the kind that can predict a 15% growth, has to be more than just solid. It has to be authentically yours. I said the word clearly, calmly, with just a slight emphasis. Authentically. For one excruciating second, nothing happened. A wave of pure terror washed over me. It failed. The script didn't run. Mark was looking at me with a mixture of anger and confusion. And then, it happened. On the massive, wall-sized screen behind him, on the title slide that was still projected for all to see, the elegant, stylized Innovate Solutions logo at the bottom right corner flickered, and then it changed. It was replaced by 5 simple words, in a clean whitey sans serif font. Property of Liam Carter. Mark hadn't noticed. He was still glaring at me, but everyone else in the room had. A collective gasp went through the executives. The CFO, who was sitting closest to the screen, literally dropped his pen. It clattered loudly on the mahogany table. Catherine's head snapped from the screen to me, her eyes wide with shocking, dawning comprehension. Amelia Vance's face was a mask of stone-cold fury. Mark Sensin Kehesudin, dramatic shift in the room's atmosphere, finally turned around. He looked at the screen, He saw his name on the slide, and he saw my name where the company logo should have been. He looked back at the remote in his hand, as if he could click it away. He clicked to the next slide. The logo was there too, property of Liam Carter. He clicked again, and again. Every single slide was now digitally, irrefutably, branded with my name. The color drained from his face. He stood there, exposed, the silence of the room roaring in his ears. The magician's trick had been revealed. The trap had sprung, and he was caught in its teeth. The silence in the boardroom stretched for an eternity. It was a heavy, suffocating silence, broken only by the sound of Mark's ragged, panicked breathing. He stood frozen, staring at the screen, a digital tombstone marking the death of his career. The confident, charismatic man from minutes ago had evaporated. Lavinge Bahindapelle, trembling shell. Amelia Vance was the first to move. She stood up, her movements slow and deliberate, her eyes fixed on Mark with a look of pure, unadulterated contempt. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't have to. Her words were quiet, cold, and absolutely lethal. Mark, Say sighed, the name itself a condemnation. Get out. It was 2 words, but they held the weight of a final judgment. Amelia, explain, Hay stammered, turning to her, his face a desperate, pleading mess. This is a prank, a hack. Liam is get out, Say repeated, each word a chip of ice. She gestured to the 2 security guards who always stood discreetly by the boardroom entrance. They moved forward, their expressions impassive. Mark looked wildly around the room, searching for an ally, Ellie Felony. He found none. Every face was turned to him with disgust and disbelief. His eyes met mine, and in them, I saw not just hatred, but a flicker of pure/unadorned terror. He finally understood. He had underestimated me. He had seen a sheep, and had never once considered that a wolf might be hiding underneath. The security guards flanked him, and without another word, he was escorted from the room, leaving his laptop, his ambition, and the tattered remains of his reputation behind him. As the door clicked shut, a collective, shaky breath was released around the table. The crisis was over, but the fallout was just beginning. All eyes now turned to me. Amelia Vance sat back down, her gaze sharp and analytical. She looked from the screen, still glowing with my name, to my face. Liam Hay sighed, her voice now calm, but with a clear, non-negotiable demand for the truth. Start at the beginning. And don't leave anything out. And so I told them. I told them about Mark's late-night visit, his veiled threats. I told them about discovering the empty folder, about finding the server logs that pointed directly to him. And then I told them about the choice I had made. I knew, aside, my voice steady, that if I simply reported the theft, it would become a he said situation. Mark would have denied it, and his word against mine might have been enough to create reasonable doubt. I couldn't risk that. The only way to prove what he had done was to let him prove it himself. The only way to expose the lie was to let him tell it to this entire room. I explained the macro, te hidden watermark, the keyword trigger. As I spoke, I saw the expressions around the table change from shock to a kind of grudging respect. They were executives. They understood strategy. They understood leverage. What I had done was ruthless, but it was also a brilliant, perfectly executed strategic maneuver. When I finished, Catherine was the first to speak. You knew this morning, Essay sighed, looking at me with a completely new understanding. When I was panicking, when you were pretending to be devastated, you knew the whole time what you were going to do. Yes, I said quietly. I'm sorry I had to deceive you, Catherine, but it was the only way to ensure he felt confident enough to walk into the trap. She just shook her head slowly, a smelly, incredulous smile playing on her lips. Don't apologize, Liam, Say sighed. That was the most savage and beautiful thing I have ever seen in my professional career. Amelia Vance stood up again. The rest of you, please excuse us, she said to the other executives. I need a word with Liam and Catherine. The room cleared, leaving the 3 of us alone in the silent, glass-walled cage. Amelia walked over to me, her expression serious. What you did today took a tremendous amount of courage, Liam, she said, and an equal amount of cold-blooded calculation. You exposed a thief, and you also exposed a serious cultural problem at this company. She sighed, looking out the window at the city below. We've been rewarding the talkers, not the doers. We've created an environment where a man like Mark Brewer can thrive, and a man like you can be made to feel that this kind of extreme measure is your only recourse." She turned back to me. "That changes today. As for you, the lead analyst position is yours, effective immediately. But more than that, you've shown me a kind of leadership I haven't seen in a long time. You let the work speak for itself, and when it couldn't, you made sure the truth was heard." I stood there, the promotion I had worked so hard for finally mine, but it wasn't the title that mattered. It was the feeling. That feeling of having stood my ground, of having fought for my work, for my integrity. I had walked into the lion's den, not with a sword, but with a key, and I had let the lion lock its own cage. As Catherine and I rode the elevator down, a comfortable silence settled between us. The adrenaline was finally beginning to fade, leaving a profound sense of exhaustion and something else, a sense of peace. "You know," Catherine said, looking at me, "I think I'm going to have it install that little watermark feature on all our department's templates." I smiled, a real, genuine smile. "I can show them how it's done," I said. The weeks that followed were a period of strange and profound change, both for me and for Innovate Solutions. The story of what happened in that boardroom became the stuff of corporate legend, whispered about in hallways and over coffee. I became, much to my introverted discomfort, a sort of folk hero, the quiet analyst who had brought down the giant. My new role as lead analyst was everything I had hoped it would be. I had the autonomy to pursue the projects I was passionate about, the authority to mentor junior analysts, and the respect of my peers. But the biggest change wasn't in my title or my responsibilities, it was in me. I walked differently. I spoke with a newfound confidence. The man who would once stare at his shoes when talking to an executive was gone. I had faced down the biggest bully in my professional life, and won, not by being louder, but by being smarter. It had taught me that I didn't need to change who I was. I didn't need to become a charismatic talker like Mark, just needed to trust in my own strengths, and to have the courage to use them when it mattered. The atmosphere on our team, and indeed across the company, began to shift. Amelia Vance was true to her word. She initiated a company-wide review of performance metrics and promotion criteria. There was a new emphasis on substance over style, on collaboration over cutthroat competition. The Mark Brewers of the company found themselves under a new, uncomfortable level of scrutiny. The quiet, diligent workers, the Liam Carters, began to find their voices, confident that their work would be seen and valued. I never saw Mark again. He was fired so swiftly and so completely that it was as if he had never existed. His workstation was cleared out by the end of the day, his name removed from the company directory. He had become a ghost. I sometimes wondered what had happened to him, where a man with his record of deceit would end up, but the thought was fleeting. He was a chapter of my life that was now closed. One afternoon, a few months into my new role, Catherine stopped by my desk. It was a sight that had once filled me with a nervous energy, but now felt comfortable, familiar. "Just got the final numbers for Q3, SHA sighed, a proud smile on her face. "The strategies you outlined in the Chimera project, they're working. User acquisition is up 18%. Even better than you predicted." The data was sound, aside with TA Srug, but I couldn't suppress my own smile. "Yes, it was," she said. "But it needed someone to fight for it. I'm glad it was you." She turned to leave, then paused. "By the way," Say sighed, a mischievous glint in her eye, "I was talking to the head of IT. He said that after the incident, he ran a full diagnostic on the server backups. He said they weren't corrupted after all. A full, perfect copy of your project was there the whole time. Funny, isn't it?" She walked away without waiting for my reply, leaving me sitting there with a slow, dawning realization. I had been so caught up in my plan, so focused on the deletion, that I had never even bothered to check the deep storage archives myself. I had taken the IT department's initial, rushed assessment as fact. My perfect trap, my high-stakes gamble, had been completely unnecessary. I could have just restored the files. A wave of dizziness washed over me. And then, I started to laugh. A deep, genuine belly laugh. Maybe I could have restored the files, but it wouldn't have changed anything. It wouldn't have exposed Mark. It wouldn't have changed the culture of the company. And most importantly, it wouldn't have changed me. The path I had taken, the terrifying, audacious, cold-blooded path, had been the necessary one. It wasn't just about recovering a project. It was about reclaiming my own integrity. I leaned back in my chair, the new lead analyst, in an office that was slowly but surely learning to value the quiet work of the people who built it. I looked at the screen, at they and lest, beautiful streams of data. It was where I belonged. But I knew now that the most important stories weren't always in the numbers. Sometimes they were in the choices we make when our backs are against the wall. And I, Liam Carter, was finally ready to write my own.